Nintendo has this legacy of having an element of their console be either integral to the experience or the marketing. Sometimes it's more important that is part of the experience than others, like the Wii with motion controls. Sometimes it is more on the marketing, and as the console continues, it kind of forgets about this gimmick as it goes on, and the developers use it less and less. But with that sort of in mind, I wanted to take a look at maybe some of the gimmicks. We're going to call them gimmicks. I'm sorry if maybe people don't like hearing that for some of these, but I'm just going to refer to them as that. But we're going to look at some of the gimmicks that Nintendo's done, what they've maybe wanted to do but never did, and then what are some that could be in the future. I think a lot of people look at the Switch 2. I don't really want to just look at the Switch 2. I want to look at potentially what could be beyond, just anything, any kind of gimmick that they could market a console around, and maybe even just use it for its entire life cycle or the kind of launch window, as some of these gimmicks tend to be their strongest at. So kind of some rules right off the bat. I want everyone to look at this like, you know, they're on stage or they're at a Nintendo Direct and they're announcing this thing and they're trying to showcase it as if it's, you know, this is a big thing for this new console that we're showing. Is this not exciting? Even with items that a lot of people find not exciting or not fun, Nintendo still tends to do this. They will, even if it's like a silly, simple thing that most people are like, I don't really gel with that, they'll still be like, look at this cool thing. It's cardboard that you fold. Is this not awesome? I love this so much. So I think that is an element that I would love for people to keep in mind when they hear me talk about these ones that are heavily opinionated. And then another thing to keep in mind, Nintendo really loves toys and like tactile things. I think a lot of people now look towards more software kind of gimmicks or advancements that they can build a console around, which you're correct, and that's probably the best way to go. But for Nintendo, it tends to be, you know, hey, this is neat to hold, this is neat to look at, this is interesting to do something with, because they're kind of a toy company first. So I also really want people to keep that in mind, that that element is very important to Nintendo. And then one last thing is, these things don't have to give this idea of this is awesome, you can fully build a whole system around this forever, and it's a great thing that you can do. A lot of these gimmicks that Nintendo have used in the past only really shine around their launch window and then are quickly not discarded but kind of forgotten about. You know, if we look at the 3DS, a lot of the 3D kind of games were built more around the beginning, and then later it was just like, yeah, the game is 3D, but it's not really designed around the 3D. Say like Mario 3D World is kind of designed around the 3D, or say the Wii U gamepad starting its life with all of these maybe fun or interesting ideas on how to use the gamepad, and then by the end of its life, its potentially most impressive game, Breath of the Wild, the functionality is literally, you can put the screen on the gamepad or on the TV, that's it. They completely dropped any uniqueness that that gamepad would have had for that game. So with those in mind, I wanted to get into some of the ideas that we might see going forward. So my general philosophy and thought process for a lot of these is looking at Nintendo's history. Nintendo does this thing where they will try some kind of gimmick, or they want to try some kind of gimmick in the past, and they can't really fully get into it until later. Or maybe the first time they try it, it fails. So I mentioned 3DS. The Virtual Boy was that first kind of push into 3D. Forgive me, there could have been some sort of weird 3D thing on the Super Nintendo or the NES or something, but the Virtual Boy was like, this is 3D, we want to do 3D. The 3DS was the perfect version of that. You know, they had patents for 3D stuff on the GameCube, I do believe, or the N64, I'm pretty sure, something like that. Like, you can tell they've wanted to do this for a while, but the 3DS was that perfect version of it. Motion controls is another good example, where you have something like the Power Glove that kind of can use a little bit of motion, and other patents that kind of had those elements, where the Wii was that perfect version of the motion that they wanted to do. So I think this idea, this concept of let's look to the past at something that maybe didn't go super far, is not a bad method at seeing, you know, future gimmicks that they could give a full shake later. And as well, I'm also going to potentially look at some patents, some weird patents that they have or maybe haven't done anything with, or never brought to fruition. There's some interesting stuff there, because it really gives an idea of things they were considering or were talking about. So just going over some of the things in the past, we mentioned the Virtual Boy to the 3DS. For motion controls, we mentioned you know, the Power Glove. There's also like the gyro Game Boy cartridges, you know, could maybe be in that motion area. Like Kirby's Tilt and Tumble is a good example. You know, if we look at something like walking devices like the Pokewalker, I'm not sure if in the past they had step counters like that, but I think the 3DS kind of with Street Pass took it to a better place, somewhere more where Nintendo would probably have wanted it, where it's this fun, you walk around, you get coins, you put the coins into certain games, you can meet people in the street. So that's an element that they had in the past that they brought forward. Game Boy camera, leads to camera-based systems like the DSi. That was something that you could tell they wanted to do and could really do it later. And now it's just kind of, the camera in there. This is a fun one, and it's kind of weird controllers. They've always kind of done this, but like the bongos, great example. I guess you could say like the Wii Zapper and the Super Scope is a good example as well, but the bongos is like that perfect, like, this is weird, really out there. In fact, it's mimicking something else, which I think is interesting. And the game, like, you have a full real game around it, a couple games. And then I think, another version of like the DK bongos is the Pokeball, where you can kind of squeeze and move around for the Let's Go Pikachu, Let's Go Eevee kind of games. That was cool, doing like a full, like, brand new controller. Mic-based games, so you have on the N64, Hey You Pikachu had the mic that you could use for that game, and I think the DS and stuff kind of brought that forward with like Nintendogs and things. So those were just some that, I think kind of follow this philosophy that I mentioned earlier, and it's not a bad place to start. So like we can look at, are there any gimmicks they left behind that were kind of integral that maybe they could bring forward again? Now, one more thing is something else to keep in mind is that Nintendo doesn't like to compete. They like to lead. At least that's what I assume. And from that, I think a lot of people go like, oh, Nintendo will do VR. I don't think so. And if they do, they'll probably try to do their own unique thing with it. But if they jump into VR, they're competing with a lot of way more capable hardware developers. I don't think they want to get into that market where it's already like, what else do you do there? And they'll figure something out, they'll make it a fun game. It's like, I don't think they'll be competing in that area. I think it's kind of simple-minded to think that they would just do VR. Like, there's potentially more weird creative things that they could do instead of just what everyone else is doing. So I think also keeping that in mind might be a thing. So now, with all that established, I think we can get into some bigger ones that I could actually see being potential gimmicks. These are just examples that I've kind of thought of. It would be really interesting if anyone else has examples that they've thought of, and I really want to say, like, try to think outside the box, something weird, even something you don't like. I don't like some of these that I've come up with, but I can see them being on stage or being in a Nintendo Direct going like, isn't this cool, isn't this exciting? So please keep that in mind. So to start with, one that I think would make people potentially upset if they integrate this in, it would be something that they would absolutely sell the console on and probably not do much with it very quickly, and that is gesture sensing and facial recognition. So if we look at one of these old patents that they had, I'm not sure if this is for the Wii U, if it was for the Switch, but essentially it has this sort of controller gamepad switch thing that is sensing the gestures that the player has. So you'd remove your hand from the controller and you do a thing. You'd catch a ball, you'd wave, you'd do something. This is something I can easily see Nintendo pitching as like a big thing, especially if you are launching with a title like a Hey You Pikachu remake, an Animal Crossing, or a Nintendogs type situation where it is this, you're taking care of something or you're interacting with something. So if they actually have this, you wave at the person, they wave back. Oh my gosh, can you not see the Nintendo employees, the people announcing it, going crazy for that thing? Of course. I think to add another element to it is facial recognition. So it has a camera and it could see your face. If you make a certain expression, then maybe the character reacts a certain way. For something like Hey You Pikachu and Animal Crossing, I think this could be pretty big. If you're mad, if you're happy, or whatever, the person in the game, the character in the game will kind of sense that. Now, a lot of this, I said up top, this is something I think they would use quite a bit early on or on just a couple launch titles that would work pretty well and then quickly would not be used. I believe literally the Switch kind of has this with their IR scanner. With 1-2 Switch. With 1-2 Switch, we see it's like that eating sandwich mini game that is kind of sensing your mouth opening and closing or motion in front of it. It's kind of sensing a quote unquote gesture there. And literally we see that's essentially the only game that kind of uses that. I'm not familiar if any others do. So this is something. Now, I think people will say, is this not just motion controls again? Yeah, kind of. I think if you build it around you are interacting with the world and the world is interacting back, I think that's the differentiator that Nintendo would like to focus on and see. So that's one that I don't think I would love to see, but I could see. Now, I mentioned simulator games for it, the Hey You Pikachus and whatnot. I haven't mentioned one that I would find personally kind of fun. I tend to like action games, RPG games, so I think if you bring in maybe some sort of like, if you have something like Ring Fit Adventure where it is like hey, it's this kind of fun RPG kind of wrapped in this thing, I think you could do something like that. So, swipe your sword, which is your hand, right next to the thing, or do a little thing, drink a potion, whatever. You could have a little bit more fun with that. Maybe in order to talk to NPCs, you have to wave at them, right? It's just simple kind of stuff like that. So that's one I could see them doing, but I wouldn't necessarily love if they do. Next one would be something a little bit more funky, and I also think people wouldn't like it that much, but that is bringing back Rob the Robot. If we see another patent from around the Wii era, they did want to make some kind of Rob Wii thing. Now, I don't think this would be like a pack-in thing. It's obviously just put the Wiimote in this Rob robot, and I don't know what it does, but it does something. Now, I think the Rob idea could work pretty well if you approach it like that Mario Kart RC car toy that they made, where it is essentially you have this toy that can react to the world, like our world is the game because there's a camera on it. For that toy, you build the Mario course in real life, you control it with the Switch. That's essential. So whatever console that would have this, you'd have this little robot. It would work best with some kind of handheld thing. We have this robot that you can kind of control. So you can, if we're using the kind of original Rob design, and I think you should, you have wheels for feet so you can wheel around. You'd have cameras in the eyes, and hopefully you can move the head around. That might be too much, but just kind of rolling around and looking with your camera is a huge thing. I then think they should focus on making a couple of potential AR games. So you can have, much like the 3DS Face Blaster game, you can have something like that, but you can actually move around the area with Rob, where you can have him go somewhere, you're controlling him. It's, kind of like a first-person shooter. It's using the environment a bit. There's something there. You could also have maybe some kind of scavenger hunt type thing. I think having some kind of RPG-esque adventure would be a really good thing to do, where if your Rob has maybe some kind of stats and level ups and stuff, potentially gets into random battles. If you have like moves that the Rob can do, have him actually do a little thing in real life, move his arm, swipe his arm, light goes on in his head when he shoots a laser, have different moves that he can lock maybe. Fine, like really build a strong adventure RPG-ish type game for that. And then you can bring in almost a Pokemon-esque crowd or idea concept where you have people that have their own Robs that maybe have their own moves and leveled up and whatever, and you can have them fight. I know you're thinking they're actually hitting each other. No, they'd have to be farish way apart. They have to like fully see their bodies in order to work. But then you could have almost like this Pokemon battle with these Robs. This really harkens back to like early 2000s anime where these kids would, they'd have their Beyblades, they'd have their Bakugans, these toys, these things that they bring Metabots, right? But you wouldn't do battling, and you're bringing that into real life. I think Nintendo fans would maybe, or the Nintendo company would maybe be very excited about that idea of like realizing that older kind of Japanese like anime, oh my gosh, these kids are bringing these things and they're challenging each other and it's very fun. And you actually have the devices that would probably move and stuff and kind of simulate these moves even in real life, but in the game you'd actually see full effects and stuff. So I think this Rob could suck, maybe would suck. If you have a really good game, it could be okay, maybe. I'm mentioning this RPG thing because I think that's the only thing I would find very fun with it. Face blasters, whatever. I wouldn't find a lot of fun with that. You could do racing and all that stuff. I think what could maybe be neat is this RPG-ish thing is the pack-in, and then potentially Nintendo could sell AR cards that have the other games in them, and you do multiple packs. This is Series 1 game, this is Series 2 game. Maybe you do a Series 3 game and that's it. Much like the Labo where it had like a couple of things. Now, could this be a launch gimmick? I think it would be fun to launch alongside a console, much like the Rob, where it was there, it was a part of it, but it wasn't the main kind of thing. Like I would argue that Zapper was maybe more the gimmick that people would have liked more and it was packed in, right? So I think if you kind of launch it alongside as like, hey, here's basically like this other game that's kind of Pokemon-y, I think it'd be kind of cool. I actually think that would be pretty cool. But it really relies on what this sort of game experience is. If it's going to be, oh, that's neat, like the Face Blaster thing on the 3DS, or if it's actually like, hey, there's actual value here. Also seeing a little Rob like moving around simulating moves is kind of cool to me. Okay, now let's move into ones that I can actually see being a thing, and that is a new button or a new element of the controller that they can kind of treat as like this fun new button. When I look at the Playdate, if you haven't seen that, it's this little handheld that has pretty much everything like a normal Game Boy, but it also has this little crank thing. And the fact that I focus so much on saying this has a crank, isn't the crank unique and cool, is from their marketing, who they've said to all the people that get it for review copies or all the people they always say, oh, this crank is an element that is unique to this device. We make sure that every game you have to use the crank for some kind of element. This is just Nintendo marketing to me. It screams Nintendo marketing, even if the crank or this new button isn't too valuable long-term or cool or unique. Just having, this is a fun little thing that is new that we put into our launch titles. Isn't this exciting? Is absolutely something I could see Nintendo do. And the idea is, what are the buttons? That is something that I think Nintendo would probably have to solve if, and I think they could come up with something really weird and unique personally. But I think people have mentioned like scroll wheels you can put on a controller. However, you have to make sure that it is fun to use. That is a big thing. The new button thing would have to be kind of fun to do. Think the Switch. When you snap in the Joy-Cons, that's kind of cool. That's kind of fun. Like click in, click out. It's got a tactile feeling. It's nice. And I think the new button would have to emphasize that aspect. This is interesting to use. It's fun to use. It's maybe cool to use. So go with that. I've mentioned like scroll wheel with maybe some like mechanics in it. So it actually like clicks when you scroll. There's like dials and stuff you can put on it. You could have some kind of switch thing, like a literal kind of light switch thing. I know it's weird. I would have faith that they could pull something off, but it is weird. I think a good example of exactly this idea is PlayStation's touchpad for the PS4. They come out with PS4 is a touchpad. Isn't this cool? Isn't this unique? A couple of their launch titles used it, and then almost every game after doesn't use it. It's just a button at this point. I think that's an example of what would happen. And yeah, I don't know. This is something I think that I could see them doing. And then to kind of go with that, another one that I think is like that, new button, well, new controller. They've done this in the past multiple times. The Nintendo 64 controller, new and weird. You can kind of build the whole thing around, whoa, there's a new weird controller. The GameCube, also, it has all the buttons that a normal console has, but it just is kind of weirdly shaped. It's got a strange layout and everything. That's an easy thing to do, to be like, look at this new thing. It's kind of new and weird. You have the Wiimote after that. It's literal television remote control turned into a game controller. So that's, another version of what we've seen there. So I think just the idea of literally the design of the controller being kind of weird and new is something there, honestly. Truly it is. The thing though is I know a lot of people are really into every controller being an Xbox controller nowadays. Oh, it's so comfy. Every controller should be like this. So if Nintendo pulls something really bizarre and makes a potentially uncomfortable but strange and unique controller, I'm there for that. I think that's fascinating, and I think they could pull it off. So this next one, it kind of fits more into a handheld as well. It would be really good for a Switch 2, even though I do not want to focus on the idea of a Switch 2. But that is a projection screen. So it has to be an handheld type system. But if you can bring something somewhere and put it down, much like a Switch, and have multiple controllers, much like a Switch, typically, everyone's playing on the small screen. If it had a little projector inside it, that's fantastic. They have a patent for this already. It's this like cell phone plug-in thing that has a projection screen. Now, projection screens tend to be worse, obviously, than a screen, but having the ability to have this, I would use it. I would absolutely use it right now. I think it's not a bad idea, especially for a kind of potential Switch 2. This is something that I think would be actually pretty cool. I would not mind this. It doesn't have any gameplay specifications unless they can program that the projection screen can be different than the screen that's there. You could, in fact, also have DS and Wii U games if you are, allowing those games to be emulated on this device. You could have that with this system. So the projection screen is like the main screen, and then the actual game that's down there is the, or the screen that's down there is the, the DS bottom screen. So it allows for that access as well. So that could probably be quote unquote the gameplay, the quote unquote gameplay potential with that. Now, finally, this is something that I can see being probably one of the better like gimmicks to do. And it's not a hardware one. It goes against the hardware stuff that I was saying before. It's a software kind of gimmick, something to build the next console around, the future console around. And that is full cell phone integration symbiosis. So what I mean by that, so the Switch, in order to chat online, you need to connect your phone. I don't know if this is still a thing, but I'm pretty sure this is still a thing, right? You essentially use the phone as the adapter so that you can use these mics. So you already have this element that Nintendo has recognized that they go, oh, people have a cell phone that has this functionality the Switch doesn't. So let's just use that. So for this cell phone integration, I am looking more at essentially bringing back the 3DS kind of Street Pass and the step counter systems and bringing it into this next console. So the commercial is, lady wakes up, with her alarmos blaring the sounds of war from Splatoon. She gets up and she grabs her phone. She opens up the Nintendo app. She smiles. It says good morning, whatever. She gets a good morning amount of coins or something. I don't know. She leaves the house to go get a coffee. And she's walking. There's step trackers or whatever. There's maybe some kind of like street pass. Like you pass 3 people. She smiles at her phone while she's drinking her latte. Goes home. And then automatically, because she's already set this up with her system, the coins and the street pass stuff that she's already gotten from her device that she's walked and met these people and got this stuff, it automatically goes to this new Nintendo console that is on her TV or wherever. And then she puts it on her phone and she picks up this new Nintendo device and it shows all the stuff that she's gotten. And that's the pitch. You're essentially integrating, your life with your cell phone and bringing back that kind of really fun street pass, world where people were bringing their 3DSs and getting stuff. And you're doing that with a device that you always carry. Everyone's carrying their cell phones all the time. So you have that aspect. Another aspect, people really want DS emulation on the system. Well, now you have a second screen, your cell phone. And people go, oh, that's kind of lame. It's just hovering. They probably sell a separate device where you can put your cell phone. It kind of clips on the bottom. And it's a touch screen as well. So you now have DS emulation on your device. Now, all of this to be looked at as if it is a Switch 2 or a Switch-ish type console where it's handheld, obviously. So there's that. If maybe it's not a handheld, it's an actual controller, like the stuff that Xbox and PlayStation is doing, you can probably have an attachment that you can put the phone on your controller as well. And that's still, you have your DS main screen on the TV, and now you have your controller with your touch screen here. It just works in my eyes. And now, you don't have to have a device that has these 2 screens. You don't have to have a device where maybe you have to buy 2 devices in order to access this sort of thing. And if it was all on your TV anyway, like I know with DS emulation, essentially they put the second screen beside it or below it or whatever. But I don't know if Nintendo actually has a second screen integration being your cell phone, that kind of fixes that problem in my eyes. Now, and then going back to that thing, that philosophy that I talked about where Nintendo tests something and then maybe brings it to fruition, they've recently released the music app. Potentially a really good push into a good, solid app that kind of connects to your Nintendo accounts and stuff. So what if this is their attempt to build this sort of Nintendo app that could maybe integrate into this new system or these new systems? Yeah, I think this one is potentially one of the stronger ideas, and actually is something that I think they should do, especially if it's easy to do. I would love that sort of Street Pass functionality back. I have my phone with me everywhere anyway. Why not? You can kind of build this ecosystem of using your phone, but it kind of adds this fun to like gamifying just using it or just being out and about with it. Even if they wanted to integrate this kind of stuff into like the Nintendo Music stuff, you listen to music and you get coins for games or something. I think it'd be really cool and something to look forward to, honestly. Anyway, so those are the main ones. Early kind of on in this, I was thinking like, the senses, where it's like, the DS is like touch. VR would be sights. I know you see stuff anyway, but like VR is like you're using your sight because it's in your eyes mainly. If sound was one of the sense gimmicks, that would probably be some kind of 3D space kind of headphone type thing. Smell, scratch and sniff. Nintendo's bringing out scratch and sniff, or even just something like an add-on that makes smells go into the air. Can you imagine if that was their like next big thing, is like we added something that makes smell come out? That would be so awful. Yeah, I don't know. That's just all my thoughts. There was some stuff that I didn't really get into, like the zapper. Are they gonna make a new gun? I doubt it, because they probably don't want to have guns and stuff anymore, and light gun stuff can be fairly restrictive. It could be a side thing, obviously, like the Wii Zapper with Link's crossbow training, but as like a main thing, I don't think so. There was that, I don't know if this is more of a software gimmick, but it was that like games you can play via radio waves. Now, I'm not saying like you bring that back, but was it not this thing where it's like there's this dedicated amount of time that you could play that the games stream into your system, essentially. And only in this window can you be playing this, and you're supposed to essentially have a large group of people moving through this game all kind of at the same time at these timelines. I actually think this is a cool idea in the sense of it does kind of bring this it's almost like this event. I essentially, like, Fortnite's kind of got this going on where, there's this 3-day event where this thing can happen and then it's gone. To have like a full, smaller kind of game be like that would be interesting, I think. But with this kind of radio wave thing, it is more closer to like streaming a game, which I suppose they could do. They could maybe try it out, and because in the future games might be streamed anyway, so maybe not the worst idea. And I mentioned the AR cards kind of with the Rob stuff, but you could maybe do a little bit more with the AR card stuff. Um, I I don't think so, but I don't know. Maybe someone's got some interesting ideas potentially. Now, please, let me know your guys' ideas. Like anyone, who got this far, I would love to hear ideas. And please don't just limit it to Switch 2. I know some of these really fall into that kind of would only really work for Switch 2. I want to just say, like, what are the gimmicks left for any future console? And also think, like, use what I said before. It doesn't have to be something that you specifically would like to see, just something that you think Nintendo might do. I mentioned some of these like gesture controls, I wouldn't want them to do, but I could see Nintendo doing and being very excited about. So I want to use that mindset. Yeah, if you liked the video, then subscribe and like and stuff like that, whatever. I'm trying to have this go on weekly, and trying to just talk about topics that are kind of fun. I'm not gonna keep going with Nintendo. I'm probably gonna move to some PlayStation stuff next. So yeah, we'll look at that. And then if you want to follow me on Coffee, you can get the 3D models that I make here, and you can use them in whatever you want. I truly don't care. Mod them into anything. Just send me a video and it'll be super cool. And I'll retweet and whatever, because I love when people use my stuff in any fan thing. And yeah. Okay. Thank you.